All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're heading back to ancient India, specifically the Mauryan Empire.
Oh, the Mauryans. Fascinating. A real global powerhouse back in the day, from 322 to 185 BCE.
Not just another empire, right? Today, we're going to figure out what made them tick, especially those impressive trade networks and diplomacy.
Exactly. They really understood how to connect with the world, not just conquer it.
And to get the full story, we're going to tap into some intel from our previous deep dives, episodes 11 and 16.
Ah, yes. The Vedas and the Mahajanapadas. That's crucial background for this one.
Right, those Mahajanapadas, those powerful kingdoms that popped up between 600 and 300 BCE.
They really laid the groundwork for the Mauryan Empire. In a lot of ways, it's fascinating how it all connects.
Okay, remind me, how did they do that? I mean, they seem more like separate kingdoms, not really unified, right?
Yeah, think of it as like a testing ground for ideas, like a trial run for governing, managing resources, all that stuff that the Mauryans later built on.
Okay, so what kind of ideas? Give me an example.
Well, take the Gangetic Plains, for instance. That fertile land could support tons of people, a big population.
Right, geography, the classic advantage.
Yeah.
Fertile land, resources, you got to have those.
Absolutely. Like, kingdoms like Magadha and Kosala, they thrived there. And Magadha, they had access to something else really important, iron ore.
Iron. That means weapons. That's a military edge right there.
Exactly. That helped them rise to the top, for sure. And, all those Mahajanapadas were constantly interacting, sometimes fighting, sometimes teaming up.
So in a way, they were shaping a more unified Indian civilization, even without meaning to.
Yeah, I think you could say that.
Yeah.
But there's more. We talked about the Vedas before and those big concepts, dharma and karma.
Oh, right, dharma and karma, I remember.
Yeah.
How did those ideas influence the political scene back then?
Well, think about it this way. Dharma was like everyone had their own kind of cosmic job description. It kept things organized and stable.
So everyone knew their place, contributed to the system, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And karma, well, it was like a cosmic scorecard, encouraging people to make good choices that lined up with dharma.
So it wasn't just about personal ethics. It was about how you fit into society as a whole.
Exactly. It influenced social behavior, everything, really. And you see this carry over into the Mauryan Empire, too. But before we go there, gotta mention one more, Mahajanapada, Vatsa.
Vatsa, okay. What were they known for?
Trade. They had these amazing trade networks, skilled craftspeople, especially with textiles.
Like a major hub, kind of like a ancient Indian trading center.
Yeah, they were definitely key players. And it's interesting because the Mauryans, especially Chandragupta Maurya, they learned a lot from these existing systems.
Ah, so he took what was already working and made it even bigger? That's clever.
Exactly. Chandragupta, he was ambitious, saw a chance to unify those fragmented kingdoms, and he went for it.
Well, he overthrew the Nanda dynasty to take over Magadha, right? That's bold.
He had a plan and a very good advisor, Chanakya, also known as Kautilya. This guy wrote a whole treatise called the Arthashastra.
Arthashastra, that sounds intense. What's it about?
Think of it like an ancient guide to ruling, basically. It's got everything. Statecraft, economics, military tactics, even espionage.
Wow, talk about a handbook for power.
Yeah.
So Chandragupta wasn't just a conqueror, he was a planner, a strategist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And understanding trade and diplomacy, that was key to his success, to building this vast empire.
Okay, so we've got the stage set, Magadha's rise, Vedic ideas floating around, trade networks already humming, and then enters Chandragupta with his big plans.
Yeah, he was ready to make history. But exactly how he did it, how he turned this kingdom into a global powerhouse, well, that's a story for the next part of our deep dive.
All right, I'm ready. Can't wait to hear more about Chandragupta and how he built this incredible empire.
All right, welcome back, deep divers. We left off with Chandragupta Maurya basically ready to take over the Indian subcontinent. But how did he go from conquering everyone to connecting them, with those trade networks that made the Mauryan Empire so famous? Well, that's what's so impressive about Chandragupta. He got it, realized that conquering was just the first step.
So he was thinking long-term, building a real empire, not just grabbing land.
Exactly. He knew true power came from having a thriving economy, making smart alliances, and trade, well, that was the heart of it all.
Okay, but how did that actually work? Like, what kind of trade networks did he set up? What exactly were they trading across this massive empire?
Think of it like this. Under Chandragupta, these intricate trade routes popped up everywhere. Within India, sure, but they also stretched beyond its borders. Imagine like bustling roads connecting all the big
So
cities.
goods could move easily, right? Like a well-oiled machine. Did they use rivers, too, for transport?
Absolutely. Rivers like the Ganges and the Indus, they were like natural highways. And don't forget, they had routes going west, too,
West, so like where exactly?
to the Hellenistic kingdoms, for one,
Yeah.
connecting them with the Seleucid Empire. They even tapped into that legendary Silk Road that went all the way to China.
Wow, talk about going global. So what were they trading on these routes? Was it mostly like fancy stuff, luxury goods for the elite?
Well, there were definitely those, beautiful textiles, exotic spices, precious stones, all those high-value items. But it wasn't just about luxury.
So what else was moving along these trade routes?
Everyday things, too, things everyone needed, grain, livestock, stuff like that. You got to keep people fed, right?
Makes sense. So they had it all. Fancy stuff for the rich folks and essentials for everyone else.
Exactly. That tells you their economy was humming. They had skilled craftspeople making high-quality goods for export. Agriculture was booming.
Yeah.
It was a diverse system, very sophisticated for its time.
All that trade must have brought in a ton of wealth for the empire.
Oh, yeah. The Mauryan Empire became one of the wealthiest in the ancient world, thanks to all that trade. But Chandragupta, he didn't just focus on money. He was smart. Knew that managing those relationships with other kingdoms, that was just as important as having a booming economy.
Ah, so he understood diplomacy, the art of not making enemies, right?
Yeah.
Especially powerful ones?
Exactly. Keeping the peace, especially with your neighbors, that was vital for any empire that wanted to last. And Chandragupta. He was a master at forging alliances. He wasn't afraid to use military force when he had to, but he also knew how to play the diplomacy game.
Got any good examples of that as diplomatic skills in action?
Oh, tons. But one of the most impressive has got to be his treaty with the Seleucid Empire. Remember them. Major force in the Hellenistic world controlled huge chunks of West Asia.
Oh, yeah, I remember. So how did he handle those guys?
Well, at first there was some fighting, the usual back and forth. But both sides realized that a long war, it wouldn't really benefit anyone. Too costly, too much trouble.
So they decided to talk it out instead of battling it out. Smart move.
Exactly. They negotiated a treaty, something that worked for both sides. The Seleucids, they handed over some of their eastern territories to the Mauryan Empire, and in return, well, Chandragupta, he made quite the gesture.
Oh, what did he do?
He gave them 500 war elephants.
Whoa, 500 war elephants. That's a serious gift.
Oh, yeah. Talk about a power move. Elephants, they were like tanks on the ancient battlefield. Nobody wanted to mess with them. So this treaty, it did a couple of things. It secured the Mauryan Empire's northwestern border, and it brought peace, which allowed Chandragupta to focus on solidifying his power inside India.
And I bet it also opened up even more trade opportunities, right, with the Seleucids and beyond.
Exactly. Plus, there's the cultural exchange that came with it. It's amazing to think how those interactions shaped things like art, philosophy, even just everyday life in both empires. And to make that alliance even stronger, you know what Chandragupta did?
What's that?
Gave his daughter in marriage to the Seleucid emperor. Royal weddings, the ultimate diplomatic tool back then. So yeah, Chandragupta, he wasn't just a conqueror, he was a clever diplomat, a real visionary leader. He built a powerful empire based on smart alliances and that whole network of trade. But what happened after him? Did his successors follow his lead?
That's what I want to know. Did they keep the empire going? Did they build on what he started?
That's where things get even more interesting. His son, Bindusara, he expanded the empire even further. But it was his grandson, Ashoka, who really took the Mauryan Empire to the next level. And his legacy, well, let's just say it still resonates today.
Ashoka, that name rings a bell. Wasn't he the one with those awesome lion sculptures?
You're thinking of the lion capital, which is now like the national symbol of India. It was put up during Ashoka's reign, shows how much art and culture flourished under his rule. But Ashoka, his story goes way beyond art and architecture.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about Ashoka. What made him such a standout figure in Mauryan history?
Well, his reign was like a turning point for the empire. He inherited this vast territory built on military power, but his story is one of transformation. He went from warrior king to, well, a champion of peace and nonviolence, and Buddhism, that played a huge role in his change of heart.
That's quite a shift for a ruler. What happened? What made him rethink his whole approach?
It was a specific event early in his reign. Ashoka was still very much in conquering mode. But then he launched this brutal military campaign to conquer the Kalinga region in eastern India. And the suffering he saw, it really shook him, filled him with remorse. That's when he decided to pursue a path of peace.
Wow, so a moment of truth that changed everything for him and for the empire.
Exactly. And his conversion to Buddhism, it wasn't just some personal thing. It influenced his policies, everything he did. He made those Buddhist ideas, nonviolence, compassion, tolerance, central to his vision for the empire.
That's incredible, but did he completely abandon the military? I mean, how do you run an empire without some muscle?
Well, he didn't get rid of the army entirely, but he definitely shifted the focus. Diplomacy and peaceful coexistence, that became his main strategy for keeping order and protecting the empire.
So more like leading through influence and smart talking than brute force.
You got it. He sent out emissaries, ambassadors, to spread the message of Buddhism, to cultivate peaceful relationships with other kingdoms, even as far as the Hellenistic world. Imagine that. It was like ancient cultural diplomacy, building understanding through dialogue and exchange.
Okay, so he's all about peace now, but what about the economy? Did all this focus on nonviolence mean he neglected trade and prosperity?
Nope, not at all. Ashoka understood that a strong economy was essential for his people to thrive. He kept promoting trade, saw it as vital for keeping the peace and stability within the empire.
So, like, peace through prosperity. Interesting approach.
Yeah, you could say that. He invested a lot in infrastructure, things like roads and irrigation systems, to make trade easier, improve those transportation networks. And not just inside the empire, he connected with other kingdoms too.
Sounds like he was big on infrastructure, realizing how important that was for everything else to work.
He definitely got it. Plus, he put in place policies to protect merchants, encourage them to do business. He knew their role was crucial, They were generating wealth and connecting all these different regions.
So, in a
But-
way, he was building on what Chandragupta started, right? Recognizing the power of trade to connect the empire and make it wealthy.
Exactly. But what's really unique about Ashoka is how he brought in those Buddhist principles into his trade policies. It was about doing business ethically, being fair, honest, compassionate in all those economic interactions.
So it wasn't just about making money. It was about building relationships, understanding between cultures. That's pretty forward thinking.
Mm.
How did his policies differ from, say, Chandragupta's?
Well, unlike those earlier rulers who mainly wanted to get as much tax revenue as possible, Ashoka, he cared about the well-being of his people, including the merchants. He lowered taxes on certain goods to make things easier for everyone, and he even supported merchants directly, because he knew they were the engine of economic growth.
It's almost like he was ahead of his time,
Yeah.
thinking about people's well-being, not just the bottom line.
He was a remarkable leader. And you know what? He even encouraged the trade of goods that fit with Buddhist principles, like medicinal herbs and plants, reflecting that emphasis on healing and compassion that's so central to Buddhism.
So he's promoting well-being, both physical and economic, and spreading understanding through trade. That's pretty innovative for his time.
Absolutely. And Ashoka's reign, it wasn't just about ethical trade and diplomacy. This guy, he was dedicated to creating a truly just and fair society, and his social policies, well, they reflected those deep Buddhist values.
Okay, tell me more about these social policies. How did he put those Buddhist principles into action?
He made a ton of changes to improve people's lives, like hospitals, and not just for people, for animals too. That shows you how far that Buddhist compassion went, extending to all living beings. He even built rest stops along the trade routes for travelers who were tired from their journeys.
That's going above and beyond. Sounds like he was really trying to make a more compassionate and just society.
He definitely was. And he put in place policies to encourage social harmony and religious tolerance. India back then, it was a diverse place, lots of different religions. Ashoka understood the importance of respecting everyone's beliefs.
Promoting unity while celebrating that diversity, that's a message that's still relevant today. But how did he make sure those values actually stuck, especially in such a vast empire?
Well, Ashoka took a unique approach. He didn't just talk about those values. He had them inscribed on pillars and rocks all over the empire. We know them as the Ashoka Edicts.
Ah, the edicts. It's like he was creating a permanent record of his vision for everyone to see. Like, hey, this is what I believe in. This is how I want my empire to be remembered.
Exactly. Those edicts, they give us a glimpse into his mind, his dreams for his people, his hope for a just and compassionate world. It's really powerful stuff.
It's incredible. We started this deep dive wanting to understand how trade and diplomacy made the Mauryan Empire a global power. We saw how Chandragupta Maurya built a foundation with his strategic alliances and conquests. Then Ashoka comes in with a whole new vision. He embraced peace, compassion, and ethical leadership, all while keeping the economy strong and expanding the empire's influence. It's It's mind-blowing how much he accomplished.
It really is. And Ashoka's story reminds us that true power, it's not just about military might or being the richest, it's about inspiring people, leading with compassion, and building a society that reflects those values.
Such an inspiring legacy. It really makes you think, especially in our own complex world. But as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the Mauryan Empire, I'm left with a question. How do we reconcile those early years, the emphasis on military power and expansion, with Ashoka's later focus on peace? Was it a complete change in their ideology, or just a natural progression as the empire matured and tried to solidify its place in the world?
That's a great question, and one that's open to interpretation. We've given you the pieces, now it's your turn, deep divers, to think about it, connect the dots, and explore the enduring legacy of the Mauryan Empire.
Great food for thought. We'll be back with the final part of our deep dive into the Mauryan Empire after a short break. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from Chandragupta's rise to power, to Ashoka's incredible transformation, and those amazing trade networks that crisscross the ancient world. But empires, they don't last forever, do they? What happened? What caused the Mauryan Empire to eventually decline?
Yeah, it's rarely one single thing that brings down an empire. It's more like a perfect storm, a bunch of factors coming together at just the wrong time. And for the Mauryans, well, they had their share of both internal pressures and external challenges that weakened them over time.
Okay, so what were some of those internal pressures? Like, what was going on within the empire that made them vulnerable?
Well, for starters, think about just how massive the empire was. I mean, it was huge. Managing a territory that big, with all those different cultures and people, that's a constant headache. Keeping control, especially over those far-flung provinces, it got harder and harder.
Yeah, I can imagine. Trying to keep everyone happy and everything running smoothly over such a vast area must have been a logistical nightmare.
Exactly. And as the empire grew, so did the cost of running it. Maintaining that huge army, all those officials funding those big public works projects, all of that took a big bite out of the treasury.
So, like, the cost of upkeep started outweighing the benefits of having such a massive empire.
You could say that, yeah. And then there's the whole succession issue. You know, Ashoka, he was a remarkable leader, but his successors, not all of them were cut from the same cloth. Some weren't as capable, some weren't as committed to his vision. So those power struggles, those weak leaders, that definitely didn't help the empire's stability.
Right, internal power struggles. That's a classic recipe for trouble in any empire. But what about outside the empire? What were some of those external threats that chipped away at their strength?
Well, they always had those pesky neighbors, other kingdoms and nomadic tribes who were constantly testing their borders. You know, the Mauryans had to be ready to defend themselves, which meant diverting resources and manpower away from other priorities.
So even when things were relatively peaceful within the empire, they still had to worry about what was happening outside their borders. Never a dull moment.
All right. And then there's the economic piece. Remember how trade was the engine of their wealth? Well, over time, those trade routes shifted and new economic powers emerged. The Mauryan Empire, they couldn't keep that economic edge forever.
So, like, they got outpaced, outmaneuvered on the global stage. Kind of ironic, considering how connected they were through trade.
It is, isn't it? It just goes to show that even the mightiest empires, they're not immune to change. They rise, they have their moment, and eventually they fall. It's a cycle we see throughout history.
True. But even when they fall, they leave a mark. So what about the Mauryan Empire? What was their lasting impact? How did they shape India? And how can we see their influence today?
Oh, they definitely left their mark on India. All those innovations in governance and administration and infrastructure, that laid the foundation for future empires that came after them. And their emphasis on trade, on diplomacy, well, that put India on the map as a global power to be reckoned with.
So they set a precedent for future empires and helped define India's role in the world. That's a pretty big legacy.
Absolutely. And don't forget about the cultural impact, especially from Ashoka. His embrace of Buddhism, his focus on peace and nonviolence, social justice, all of that had a huge impact on Indian society and really the world. I mean, Buddhism spread all across Asia, and it still has millions of followers today.
It's amazing how the actions of one leader can ripple through time like that, shaping the course of history and leaving a legacy that endures for centuries.
It is. And even though the Mauryan Empire itself eventually faded away, their story teaches us a lot about the power of ideas, the importance of engaging with the world, and the enduring quest to build a society based on compassion and fairness.
It's a story full of valuable lessons and insights, ones that are still relevant to us today, no matter where we live or what we do. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Mauryan Empire. We covered a lot of ground, from their humble beginnings to their rise as a global powerhouse, their eventual decline, and the legacy they left behind. It's a story full of ambition, innovation, conquest, and ultimately, transformation. And it reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and names. It's a tapestry woven from the actions and ideas of countless individuals who shaped the world we live in today. Thanks for joining us on this journey through time. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of history. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.